Previously on this channel, I took a look through Metacritic to identify what the folks over there think are the worst games in my collection. I had a lot of fun taking a look back at those games and exploring the bad side of gaming. However, as fun as it is to talk about the bad games, it's completely unfair to not take a moment and give due credit to the good games as well. So today, we're going to do the same thing, but in the opposite direction, and look at the best games in my collection according to Metacritic. A couple caveats though. Same as before, Metacritic is an imperfect system, and this is not meant to be taken entirely seriously. I will be using critic scores to organize the ratings rather than user scores, and unfortunately, the further back in gaming you go, the more spotty video game representation becomes on the website. So many old games simply do not have aggregates here and cannot be included. Also, there will only be one game per franchise. Otherwise, Mario and Zelda alone would dominate the entire list. Now let's begin and take a look at what critics thought were the best games in my personal collection. 007 Goldeneye for the Nintendo 64, coming in with a 96 critic score and a user score of 9.0. This is the lowest rated game we're looking at today. If you were born before the year 2000, there's a good chance you've played this at least once, though when you played it might determine how much you actually enjoyed it. For this game, I want to coin a term: nostalgia. That doesn't mean that the nostalgia is so strong that you nut, but that the nostalgia is also accompanied with a kick in the nuts. Once I hear the music in the game, the menu sounds, and once I see these beautiful beige files, man, I am in another world, a world of innocence and fun. Riding a train of good feels. I'm a kid again playing this game at a buddy's house, which I guess isn't a purely sweet memory. Anytime somebody beat him at the game he owned, he would hit them on the knees with the pointy end of the controller really hard. And that shit hurt. Still didn't stop us from trying to beat him though.
I used to be an adventurer like you, and I took an
N64 controller
in the knee.
Now, once you enter the gameplay and you get past all these familiar sounds, the nostalgia ends and the nostalgia begins. Goldeneye, like many games on this list, is very highly rated because it broke new grounds. However, it has not aged well.
No, it's all wrong!
The N64, for starters, only has the one joystick, which now feels really alien for a first-person shooter. Simply controlling Goldeneye is a cumbersome endeavor. Aiming, walking, interacting with things, none of it feels intuitive anymore. But at the time, this is just what console FPSs were. In terms of its single player, Goldeneye was a loose retelling of the movie of the same name, and the level designs and objectives were fun and memorable. Granted, as a kid, anything that didn't present itself in a cutscene might as well have not been part of the story for me. To me, growing up, this was just a game where you shoot people to different backdrops and sometimes save people. Multiplayer or messing with the cheats was where the game left its lasting impression. 4-player split screen, the thing the N64 was best known for, and the one thing I'd like to see carried on more today. Let's not laugh also at the sheer amount of content here. Loads of characters, weapons, and optional stages to unlock easily made this worth its asking price. Nowadays, we're lucky if a high-profile FPS comes with half as many multiplayer maps. And of course, if it does come with half or slightly less, you'll be able to get more at an increased cost later on down the road through DLC. Goldeneye is possibly the one game on this list that I think if it re-released today for the first time as it is, its score would not be anywhere near this high. It sadly aged that badly, at least in my opinion. Granted, I still had fun turning it back on, and I adjusted to its quirks quick enough, but I certainly wouldn't describe this as gaming in comfort. But the legacy that it left is irreplaceable, and without a doubt, we owe so much to this title. Keeping in the same genre, next up we have the first Halo game, coming in with a critic score of 97 and a user score of 8.5. Halo was, for its generation, what Goldeneye was for the generation before it. The next logical console advancement in a genre that still had room for improvement. And the improvements it made were definitely worth the score it got at its time. When Halo released, I had hardly had this kind of fun before. Sure, sitting 4 people to one TV on Goldeneye was one thing, but what about sitting 4 people to one TV, while 4 other people on another TV in the same house were also playing against you? Putting aside the console's online capabilities, this was the advancement I took the most advantage of. Nothing got me more amped back in the day than the LAN parties we'd have at a buddy's house. Staying up late, drinking a disgusting amount of pop and eating a disgusting amount of potato chips and pizza pops, and shouting across rooms in the house every time somebody got the better of us, until the sun would creep up over the horizon and our throats would be going raw. Man, they were good times. Good, sweaty times. Halo, of course, had a full campaign mode as well. And for its time, and I'd say even now, it's an excellent designed campaign that tells a compelling story, save for a few levels. The best part is, you can play the campaign on co-op. Hell, just about this time last year, I done exactly that with my fiance and found that even she liked the game. After all these years, Halo 1 has hardly aged. It shows in its cinematics, but the gameplay is still as good as ever. It's very easy for new players to jump into. Then again, it also laid the groundwork for a lot of the shooters that came after it. And the games that came after it, by and large, don't play that much different. Despite this being the highest rated Halo game, I gotta say, I think that a lot of that comes from just being the first of its sort. Games that break new grounds tend to get rated higher than games that tread the same ground but better. Personally, Halo Reach is my favorite, but I'd also put Halo 2 and 3 above the first. Halo 4 and onward I've yet to play and can't comment on, but I don't feel like they'd beat out the others anyway. Someday I'll get around to them because I do genuinely like this series. It's just not often I find the time to play shooters anymore. Coming in with another critic score of 97, we have Super Mario Odyssey, also boasting a user score of 9.0. Alright, so there's multiple Mario games with a 97, Galaxy 1 and 2 both included, and I'm sure there's an argument to be made, and knowing YouTube's comment section probably will be made, on why one is actually better than the other, but hear me out. I don't really like the Wii controller that much, and I don't want to set the system up, so we're talking about Odyssey, every faux intellectual's favorite game to call just alright. Mario Odyssey is a solid game that I beat and I loved and I didn't bother to review because who actually even needs a review of Mario Odyssey? Let alone from a channel like this. You go around from planet to planet gathering moons to power up your ship so that you can get to Bowser and prevent him from forcing Peach to marry him. It's your regular state of affairs in that department. Some moons are a joke to collect and at times you might not even know what you've done to get one. But the vast amount of moons to get and the variety in level designs and obstacles that contain them are just flooring. What made Odyssey stand out among its contemporaries though, was the use of Cappy. Not only can this sentient hat be used to massively expand your moveset and make traversal the most in-depth and fluid it's ever been, but Cappy can interact with a ton of environment objects and take over almost any enemy in the game, allowing you to fully control them and utilize all their neat gimmicks. Having so many different creatures to play as who mostly all play in different ways added a depth to the design of almost everything in the game, and it kept gameplay feeling like it was constantly evolving and innovating to bring new challenges to the player. It's easy to spend upwards of 40 hours in this game without getting bored, and that's something you just can't say about any other Mario platformer. In most games, that's long enough to 100% the game and put it away forever. But not here. Mind you, 40 hours is far longer than necessary to beat the game, but with the controls as slick as this, visuals as charming as these, and design this solid, 40 hours are spent smiling. And Mario Odyssey, to me, earns all 97 of its points. Or at least earns pretty darn close to it. I only have two real complaints with this game. One, the controller is pretty underutilized. You have a massive moveset, but it's all crammed into 2 buttons. The other complaint is difficulty. It's definitely too consistently easy. The difficulty, or rather lack thereof, never stops it from being enjoyable, but I do feel I could get just a little more out of the game if it tried to get just a little bit more out of me. But that's a minor gripe with this one at the end of the day. With yet another 97, we have Metroid Prime on the Nintendo GameCube with a user score of 9.2. Boy, this game changed some landscapes. Puritans or diehards for the Metroid games that came before this may not have liked the change in direction, at least not at first. But for the most part, the Prime series was widely celebrated, and the games are hailed as some of the best of the generation and possibly of all time up until that point. Though I found Metroid Prime 1 at the time to feel way ahead of its time, both with its gorgeous worlds and innovative gameplay, I feel now this would be hard for people to go back to, especially with the aiming system being what it is, bringing your character to a standstill just to fire off a few well-placed shots. But for me, it felt really easy to adjust to while playing the game again for this video. Metroid, to my surprise back in the day, wasn't so much about just shooting aliens and working your way through a maze. It was about exploring areas, getting new power-ups, then using those power-ups to get into even more new areas. It was about environmental puzzle solving in a sort of Legend of Zelda style fashion, complete with almost Zelda-esque bosses and dungeon-like locations. Metroid Prime was a grand adventure that told an intriguing story in a world that was fleshed out on a really deep level through the use of environmental information scanning, and this is honestly what I remembered the game best for. Outside of RPGs, this kind of depth and environmental storytelling and world building was rare to come across. Sure, the amount of stuff to scan and read can be overwhelming, but it's worth it to better understand the world and your enemies just that little bit more. The backtracking in the game can get a little tedious at times, and it's fairly easy to get lost on these maps, but overall the Metroid Prime trilogy is still worth playing today, and that'll be double true if the rumored Switch ports turn out to be a reality. Granted, this series, like many others, did taper off in its final entry, and at least in Japan it's not the biggest seller, but Nintendo must know fans are still out there, and God knows I felt like I was one of them the day they revealed Metroid Prime 4 was in development.
Oh my god! Okay, it's happening! Everybody stay calm!
What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure?
Stay calm!
And then they revealed that it was in development again, and the original plans were scrapped. But hey, if they're gonna do it at all, let's hope they do it right. With yet another 97, we have a rather shocking entry with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 on the PlayStation 2, only garnering a user score of 7.5. I loved the Tony Hawk games growing up, and found Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 to be the best balanced in terms of how it toes the line between being an arcadey sports game and a simulator. At Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, the stages opened up a lot more and the game was much more forgiving, making it easier to balance your grinds and link your tricks, get much higher airtime, and grind over things that are otherwise impossible in real life. What this done for the game didn't exactly hurt it overall, but I did like the balance of two better. What made the Pro Skater games what they were and what made them great is still here and is still great. From the excellent little parks to find hidden objects in and find the longest areas to chain combos on, to the board shop and all the pro skaters you can ignore in favor of just playing as Rodney Mullen every time. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 is probably the best realization of everything the games were going for, even if it's not technically my favorite. Of course, the soundtrack here is just as awesome as they always were, and I actually have this series to thank for first introducing me to bands like Red Hot Chili Peppers, Power Man 5000, and Primus back in the day. Though for obvious reasons, I'm not going to demo their music for you guys here today. What kept me coming back to these games, aside from the challenge of some of the harder level objectives, was its awesome level editor. Sure, it's not as great or powerful as I remember, but I used to spend so much time in these things. I remember distinctly building the smallest bowls that I could, just to see how much air I could get in them, cause without a doubt, it was higher than anything in the normal game would ever let you achieve. Also, who could forget excellent co-op experiences, or excellent versus modes, like horse matches? This is a great game in the footnote of console sports games, and a nice little slice from the era where extreme sports were all the rage. But it's not a game I thought I'd see on this list, to be completely honest. Most of the highest rated games of all time seem to be narrative or adventure driven games. Yet this one is, interestingly, almost all about completely small, unrelated objectives and challenges. Certainly being so highly rated on that alone is worthy of some additional praise. If only the series steered away from bad gimmick-oriented spin-offs and its abysmal attempt to recreate the old days with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5, maybe this series would still be thought of fondly. With a 98, we have Grand Theft Auto 4 on the Xbox 360 with a user score of 7.9. Well, just because it's highly rated doesn't exactly mean it's going to be for me.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Now don't get me wrong, I liked the Grand Theft Auto games up until this point, and by no means did I hate this game. But around when this came out is when my disinterest in games like this started to take over. On the one hand, the sandbox aspect and city itself isn't half bad. Are there some things cut out from the previous games? You betcha, but what's here is serviceable. You can easily kill loads of time exploring, doing random side missions, or finding good vantage points to snipe pedestrians from and rake up your wanted meter. Sadly, some of my favorite bits from San Andreas were missing, and the city just didn't have much visual appeal, not like Vice City anyway. The story wasn't half bad, and actually shaped out some fun characters while making an important statement or two along the way. But boy does just going through the story get tiring after a while. It doesn't take long for mission structure to feel repetitive. Aside from one mission where you get to snipe a guy through a window, you only do two things: drive, or recklessly gun people down. Sometimes you do both at once. Neither the driving physics nor the gunplay are good enough to carry the whole runtime of the story, which is why by the end I ended up feeling like Grand Theft Auto 4 just wasn't exactly for me, and why when 5 released for the first time in years, I didn't actually buy it. Considering how Grand Theft Auto 5 has been in the top 10 selling games since it launched and brought in something like $6 billion, I'm guessing I'm one of the only people to still not own it. But who knows, maybe someday I will. And the highest rated game in my collection, and possibly the highest rated game of all time, coming in with a critic score of 99, is Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo 64, with a user score of 9.1. Boy, there is a such thing as nostalgia on a cartridge, and it is definitely The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time.
Shit.
When I boot this game up, I see this title screen, the calming music, the rhythmic clips and clops of Epona's hooves darting across Hyrule Field. I am an absolute child again, and I know I'm about to embark on a well-crafted, rewarding, and epic adventure, and also go to the Water Temple. There's no denying this influential landscape changer for action-adventure games was worth its near-perfect score at release. Adventure games had never looked or felt this way before on home consoles. The introduction of Z-targeting created tighter-feeling combat than we've ever had, despite the limited attack animations. Having an instrument you could actually play in ways comparable to the real thing raised the immersion levels and really helped you feel like you were a living part of the world. The fact that the songs were catchy too was just an added bonus. Dungeon designs were incredibly fresh, having been the first time they designed in 3D. This jump from the top-down and side-on Zelda games to a full 3D one allowed them to build dungeons out in entirely new and interesting ways. It also made a ton of new item ideas real possibilities for Nintendo. And though any lesser studio trying this out for the first time could have failed in 101 different ways, Nintendo took the potential of new 3D home consoles and ran with it. And they succeeded in showing us everything that we were missing and didn't know for all those years. But looking back on it now, it is of course easier to pick out its flaws. From some questionable controls to odd camera placements, these subpar frame rates that were sadly common during the early age of 3D console games, I mean, there's lots that can be done to fix the game without fundamentally changing it. But as it was, at its release, this was my favorite Zelda game, beating out Link to the Past and Zelda 2. Though now I would probably put it behind Link to the Past, and I actually consider Wind Waker to be my favorite Zelda game of all time. That said, when Wind Waker released, I had very different feelings towards it, but that's a story for a different time. But what more can really be said about The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time that you haven't heard before? It is the highest rated game of all time according to Metacritic, and without a question, you've all heard more than you'll ever need to about it before you clicked on this video. It's not my favorite Zelda game, but it's a damn good one regardless. So those are just some of the best games in my collection according to Metacritic. Now that we've looked at the lowest of the low and the highest of the high, where do I sit with rating systems like this? Well, they are very clearly a product of the time the ratings were given. Often high praise is given to games that break new ground, even if those games appear dated quickly. Similarly, games that take the same ground and perfect it often see lower praise despite being a possibly better game. In this sense, looking back at history this way to determine what is or is not the best becomes a terribly flawed system. Methods of measurement like this, especially when not looking at things in a vacuum, are heavily inundated by first impression biases, and that sadly undermines many great games. But do scores like this have a use at all? Well, they are a powerful marketing tool, and they may serve as a good jumping off point for gamers to get a new game on their radar, but they should never be taken at face value. Aggregates like this only serve to represent the broad appeal of a game to a general audience. Though individuals make up a general audience, we are ourselves not a general audience, and so broad appeal shouldn't be taken with much importance. Though I don't use rating systems myself, I feel if you're somebody who's looking for scores of this nature, you should find a small handful of individuals you relate to and see what they think of a game. Their opinion should be taken to mean much more than a general opinion or aggregate score. While some of these games may end up as some of my favorite games of all time, some others just would not make the cut. If I decided what the best games in my collection were, it'd look more like this, or these, or even this. But again, that is at the end of the day because I am not a general audience with a general opinion. I am me. And you're you, which is why doing personal research is so important. Never stop your research at a score, ladies and gentlemen. They are not as important as many of you may feel. But that's all I'm going to say in this video. I hope you guys enjoyed looking at the best games in my collection according to Metacritic. Even if all this stuff that I said towards the end actually kind of negates the whole purpose of the video. If you guys like the video, you know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, and share the video if you can. Links to my socials and my Patreon are in the description below. And as always, folks, thanks for watching.